morning, everybody. As I used to say, listen with mother, I hope you're all sitting comfortably, because we'll begin now. My name's David Good. I'm the person in charge of humanities and social sciences research in King's here, and very pleased to welcome you to this meeting that's been initiated by and led by Gavin Oldham, who'll be talking in a minute. As ever with these sorts of things, I need to say the safety announcements. The first part of the safety announcement is, if the fire alarms go off, it's real. There's no test this morning. Secondly, do not run around like headless chickens. There's a fire exit over there. If you know where the fire exit is, just go through it, go outside and assemble out there. This programme is part of a series of initiatives in some respects in King's, where we're making more and more headway in connecting with colleagues in the world outside, sometimes NRM, sometimes just key supporters, to look at problems in the world where there's a real value to what's going on in the academy, and academic research can really deliver value, alongside things that happen in the world with particular purposes with social value. And this is a very good example of this. I mean, King's often gets known for its chapel and its choir, and for good reason. We've tried to have spiritual impact, you might say. We certainly have musical impact. We also like to have, as a college, impact on things that go on in the real world. We often tend not to get noticed for that, but in the context of economics, I'm sure you've all heard of Maynard Keynes. Well, he started the Department of Applied Economics in this university. And so if one thinks about that kind of history and background, this project fits very neatly with that conceptualization of bringing academic research into connection with the world. As you'll see, that's never a straightforward connection. As we go through the morning, we'll be talking about what's happening in the world, how we understand it, and what's happening in the academy to deliver value to what's happening in the world. But that value chain is often a very tricky thing to understand. But if you understand it, you can do much better in the academy, and you can do much better in the world. So it's a mutual gain. It's a non-zero-sum game. I'll be talking much more later. I'm not an economist, I should add. I'm a psychologist, but I've worked with lots of people in very applied topics, so this is of great interest to me. With that piece of background, and a welcome to the folks in the room, and a welcome to those online. We have an audience that's gradually going online. James, how many do we have so far? 10. And growing, hopefully. Anyway, Gavin's going to introduce the morning, give the background, then we move on to the first talk, which is about the work that's been going on Stepladder Plus. We'll have a break for coffee, then we'll have another section afterwards where Gavin and I will be talking about how we take this forward, and then a panel discussion at the end. Well, one of the things we want to do is to make sure there's lots of connection between people. I was delighted to see everybody chatting to each other out there over coffee. Some of us have badges, but there is a list of all the people here. I recommend you pick up a list of the people here, and as you get to talk to different people, you can tick them off as you go through. And whoever has the most full card will probably win some prize from Gavin. It might be the end of year report from the Share Foundation. Gavin, over to you.
Thank you. Thanks very much, David. Much appreciated. Well, good morning and a very warm welcome to you. This is the first occasion that we're having like this, so it's very much the beginning of a process. It's a 4-year program at King's, and I'm very grateful to Eric French, who you'll be seeing later on, who leads it from the economics faculty. And to King's College for really enabling this whole process to go forwards. So it's very welcome. We have got, it's a hybrid occasion, and at the back James Hasler is organising the arrangement with the Zoom arrangements, and so that's really good. It is recorded, so just to let you know from that point of view. I do hope when we get to that point that you'll participate as much as you feel able to with comments, questions, and anything else. So, it was in October 1974 that Keith Joseph first spoke of breaking the cycle of deprivation. 1 year earlier, I had spent a couple of months on the island of Bjarkøya in the Oslofjord, working with the Nansen International Children's Centre, a charity which provided a new outlook on life for young people from very deprived backgrounds. I'd also recently been introduced to Antoine de Saint-Exupéry's book. You probably know The Little Prince. You may not know of his book Wind, Sand and Stars, or Terre des Hommes in French, whose epilogue speaks so movingly of the lost potential of so many young people who grow up in poverty. He was writing in the 1930s, but his words apply just as strongly today. Our world is incredibly unequal. There are two sources of data, one from the OECD, which I've got here on this slide, and the other from Credit Suisse Global Wealth Data Book. In the OECD chart, which you'll see on the slide here, you can see that 80% of the world, 80% of the wealth is owned by the top 10% of households in the United States. On average, across 27 OECD countries, the wealthiest 10% of households own half of all household wealth. The corresponding figure for the top 1% is 18%. The slide from Credit Suisse, this one here, shows graphically how countries and regions rank in terms of real poverty, which is in red, the basics, which are yellow, comfortable green, and rich blue. Adam Smith, Karl Marx, Clement Attlee, and I have to say John Maynard Keynes have nothing to be particularly proud about here. Current economic systems have either put serious money in the hands of the super-rich and the oligarchs, or they've concentrated control and built up stacks of public debt in the hands of government, in both cases leaving large numbers of people at basic level or worse. Now, what's really interesting about this chart here is to look at the contrast in different countries. You've got Africa and India there on the right-hand side, and then Russia. You move across, you see China in the middle there with that large yellow section. And then you've got Europe and USA and UK on the left-hand side. And the interesting thing is to look at the age differentials as well. Because the situation is particularly bad when you take a closer look at ethnic minorities and age differentials. The root cause of continuing injustice is economic inequality, and particularly the denial of opportunity to young black people. The median age in the UK is 40. In the United States and China, it's 38. In India, it's 28, and in Nigeria, it's just 18. So when you put that in the context of that chart, it does give a link to where the associations are from that point of view. Jenny Russell, a journalist in The Times, wrote an article headed "Fixing the Wealth Gap is the Key to Racial Inequality" in 2020. She quoted some sobering statistics from the Office of National Statistics Wealth and Asset Survey 2018, showing that the average white British household has £282,000 in assets, including pensionable wealth, savings and housing, compared with just 24,000 for black African and Bangladeshi families. Only 1/3 of black families own their own homes, compared to 2/3 of white families. Only one in 33 black students get at least 3 A-levels in A-level exams, compared with 1 in 10 for white students. So it's clear that while capitalism has a huge amount to offer in terms of wealth creation and encouraging free enterprise, it has still not found a way of enabling participation for all. Egalitarian capitalism started to take hold on me in the late 1970s. And in 1987, I wrote to Margaret Thatcher advocating a new approach called popular inheritance. I received a welcoming letter in reply, but no action. When the government changed in 1997, I wrote again to Gordon Brown. the new Chancellor. I can't remember receiving more than an acknowledgement, but a few years later he announced the Child Trust Fund, the first large-scale attempt at intergenerational rebalancing. More on that later. And that's also enough on my journey for now. So, we all know the problem that needs to be tackled in order that Thomas Jefferson's statement, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, and that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness," should apply for all. The SHARE programme is setting out to tackle this challenge, and this morning we welcome you to look at to take a first look at progress to date and the opportunity to ask some searching questions. So let's start with the big ticket principles. The first is disintermediation. We are not looking for a dictatorship of the proletariat or a massive welfare structure which puts all of the power in the hands of government or big financial institutions, however benign. Empowerment of the individual is at the heart of our programme, and we're also not looking to undermine aspiration for success by levelling down for those whose journey is already delivering results. However, the human cycle is our great asset, because when we leave this mortal coil, levies on inheritance, that are already the case in the because when we leave this mortal coil, we can take nothing with us. We are, as David Malone's programme, The Secret Life of Waves, said a couple of days ago, transient beings. But unlike the waves and the animals, we are able to endow those who follow us with education, with information, and with assets. It is a great opportunity for rebalancing, but it shouldn't result in taking more in levies on inheritance than is already the case in the United Kingdom and the United States, where the rate is 40%. The problem is that what government currently collects in inheritance tax is squandered on current public expenditure. And in the United Kingdom, that's £6 billion a year. Individual ownership and responsibility go hand in glove. It's proven in home ownership as against home rental, in employee share ownership, and in all sorts of other areas where a sense of ownership not only enables participation, but also a real sense of responsibility. For it to be real, it cannot be intermediated. And if it's pooled, it soon loses its sense of relevance. It also involves understanding values, risk, and the opportunity to share in control. It requires both psychological insight and education. However, understanding a sense of ownership takes time to develop, as it requires a transformation in attitude. Looking back to my days working with that children's centre in 1970s, I can recall how young people would be given a suitcase full of clothes and so on, possessions to take with them on the day before they travelled, and how the suitcases would often be found strewn across the field, open to the rain the following morning. This is why capital grants must be accompanied by a genuine process of developing life skills. It's the difference between giving a fish to feed for a week and teaching someone to fish to last for a lifetime. We are also looking for long-term change, not for instant results which can get swept away at the next general election. In the United States, its written constitution provides a bedrock which underpins such assurances, as Ruth Ginsburg discovered in her campaign for gender equality. Here in the United Kingdom, the concept of constitutional guidance is harder to pin down. And as climate change has shown, there needs to be a global acceptance of some elements of that constitutional sense of direction. So, what of the barriers? The very term egalitarian capitalism is a challenge for many people. In their view, a contradiction in terms. But capitalism is essentially about free enterprise and the individual. And that's what we want. We just don't want it to deny the opportunity to all people to participate, particularly the young. So there needs to be a presumption in favour of individual empowerment and participation for all, and a desire to see the human cycle provide those opportunities for inheritance right across society. The fear of dilution will be another substantial barrier. Participation for all means participation in equity ownership. When we're talking about wealth creating businesses, and equity ownership, particularly among the tech giants, is very concentrated, to the extent that this handful of people can even finance space tourism. While some great tech entrepreneurs, such as Bill Gates, have their eye on the good of all, others are more interested in luxury yachts. Will they have the vision of someone like John Speeden Lewis, son of John Lewis, who enabled all his employees to be partners in his enterprise? Or will some changes require regulatory mandating in order to recognize the contribution that all customers make to wealth creation, particularly through the harvesting of their data? I've already spoken of the challenge of long-term consistency, but government itself needs to know when to let go. Individual empowerment doesn't mean Uncle Sam looking over your shoulder all the time, and it certainly shouldn't result in mass subservience in the form of universal basic income. Governments need to understand that universality has, in most cases, become just an electoral bribe, and they need to refocus on more effective delivery of a safety net for those who can't take advantage of the opportunities of individual empowerment, rather than removing choice from their citizens in so many walks of life. That's why the spectrum of governing methodology merits some analysis.
Right.
We're used to that linear dimension of left, right, and centre ground in politics, but little attention is given to disintermediating government. The conservative right may talk of yearning for smaller government and individual choice, but they're really only speaking in respect of those who can afford it. Economic freedom for all should be the precursor of political freedom for all, because otherwise it's understandable that the political class would see disintermediated government as another word for anarchy. So, if these are the principles and some of the likely barriers, what are the propositions? Well, they start with intergenerational rebalancing. There are two aspects to this: where the resources to enable rebalancing should come from, and how they should be applied for young people who really need them. Our first session will focus on the latter. There are plans to investigate the former, centred upon the broad spectrum of inheritance tax policy and inappropriate application of its proceeds, but we're not yet started on that argument. So Natasha and Tina will talk about starter capital accounts and incentivized learning, and how the Share Foundation is providing a new approach for attitudinal transformation and breaking that cycle of deprivation. The second proposition is stock for data, and it uses a very different argument to pursue participation in wealth creation for the great majority of humanity. It's a radical approach which has emerged through the opportunity of a tech revolution, and it tested well in the ZN seminar in 2021. Cedar Bazahos will introduce the concept and how we plan to investigate it further, including learning from several decades of experience with employee share ownership. On our Share Alliance website, you'll find more on other propositions, including targeted welfare, to which I've referred earlier, individual ownership, and what that means in terms of financial awareness, and how to tackle effective governance for the long term, including steps which could be taken to encourage a greater degree of global convergence. But all these last areas are ahead of us at present. Rome wasn't built in a day, and our research programme cannot provide all the answers after just the first 3 or 4 months. However, the SHARE programme is pursuing a very big agenda. We are looking to make significant changes to the world's economic system, some of which can be taken nation by nation, and others, such as Stop for Data, which call for international application. So here is our wider plan of action. It starts with research here in Cambridge. Well-founded economic change requires academic rigour. So many excellent proposals have been drafted for committee approval of one kind or another, often fielded by impressive think tanks, and many are welcomed enthusiastically at the time. I was a member of the Church of England's General Synod for 26 years, and the number of proposals which passed through that assembly was legion, but few have ever seen the light of day in terms of full implementation. So the move towards a more egalitarian form of capitalism will require academic rigour, analysis and testing, but alongside it will be a process of education and advocacy. It cannot stay indefinitely in these magnificent ivory towers. So we are forming the charity Share Alliance as the vehicle to provide dissemination and wider involvement, so that those who steer societal and economic development, those who help shape opinions, and those who will benefit as those plans are implemented, can become familiar with the ideas, and particularly because many of them may appear very unfamiliar at first sight. The journey towards implementation will depend on the proposition. In some areas, such as the recipient end of intergenerational rebalancing, much progress has been made already by the Share Foundation in its role providing starter capital accounts and life skills for young people in care on behalf of the Department for Education. This has already been in action for 11 years, and the charity has just had its contract renewed for a further 4 years by the department. So with 200,000 young people who've already benefited from its operations, this is very much intergenerational rebalancing in action. In addition, 33,000 young people have thus far found their child trust funds through the Share Foundation, which has contributed to the National Audit Office Child Trust Fund study. I will be attending the Public Accounts Select Committee in May to provide further assessment of this huge scheme. And I should say about the scheme that 42% of adult CTF owners are not claiming their accounts because they don't know anything about them. So that's an illustration of the problem that we're tackling there. Implementation in other areas will require painstaking attention to detail. And we're pleased to have had early contact with organisations such as Meta and Global Shares, which is a huge international employee share ownership business. It's now part of JP Morgan, in order to help plan the way forward. International implementation will involve discussion with key bodies such as the OECD, the G7 and the G20. While we expect early interest to be more forthcoming in the democratic family of nations, we will certainly not regard discussions with autocratic nations, such as China, as in the too difficult box. Indeed, it may be easier for them to progress with the concepts of egalitarian capitalism than with democracy itself. So, let's introduce you to the team here in Cambridge. Firstly, Professor Eric French. Eric, would you kindly say a few words about yourself and the Economics Faculty Management of the programme?
the Montague Burton Professor of Labor Economics and Industrial Relations. I'm in the econ faculty. I'm working with an excellent team who I guess will later get to tell us all a little bit about what they've been working on. And so in terms of my overall research agenda, it's largely based on the study of inequality. For example, why, for example, do high-income parents have relatively high-income children? And so I think this is a really exciting opportunity to try and think about what sorts of policies might be sensible in terms of trying to address these sorts of inequalities, both just in terms of high inequality across individuals, as well as why it seems as though relatively high-income parents have high-income kids.
Thanks very much, Eric. Thanks. Cedar Bazos is our research fellow, taking a particular interest in stock for data. Cedar, would you kindly say a few words about your journey and your involvement?
Thank you so much. I'm Stella Bazos. I'm working on the element of inequality and technological transitions and economic growth. So we propose something very new, very radical on the scope for data. And we will discuss it and what would be the benefits for the well-being of the society or the well-being of capitalism, if you will. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Tina Zhang is our PhD student who is researching the outcomes effectiveness for incentivized learning. And she has been liaising with the Share Foundation and others since last August. Tina, would you say a few words?
Hello everyone, my name is Tina and I'm currently a first-year PhD student studying economics at Cambridge and Eric's my supervisor. So my own research is more relevant to public policy, but in this SHARE program, my main role is to research the impact of the Stepladder Plus program on teenagers' likelihood of becoming, which I will talk more specifically about in my later speech. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thanks. And for the Share Foundation, Natasha is a person who runs the Stepladder of Achievement program for young people in care. Natasha, would you introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, I'm Natasha Richmond. I, as Gavin said, run the Stepladder Plus program for the Share Foundation, and you'll be hearing from me shortly afterwards, so I'm not going to give too much away right now.
Thanks. Meanwhile, David Good, who has already welcomed you on behalf of King's College, and I will be steering moves towards that wider education, advocacy and implementation process. And our panel today includes Professor Michael Manelli, who runs ZN, who first aired the concept of egalitarian capitalism in his summer 2021 seminar, and also Eric French, who you just heard from just now. I'm afraid that Paul Johnson has sent his apologies as he's not able to be with us after all today, so I apologise about that. So, there we are. Welcome to the first outing for the SHARE programme. It's indeed a programme with a huge ambition before it, which aims to change the world's economic system in order to enable participation for all. It will only do this with a great determination to carry it through. And so I'm going to end with a prayer written by Ronald Selby Wright, which has stood in a frame in my office for over 20 years. Do not pray for easy lives. Pray to be stronger men and women. Do not pray for tasks equal to your powers. Pray for powers equal to your tasks. Then the doing of your work shall be no miracle, but you shall be a miracle. Every day you will wonder at the richness of life, which has come to you through divine grace. Thank you very much.